morning. One of the sound bites, I suppose you could say, of my life was at various times Muhammad Ali, the great boxing champion. Not that I was in any way a boxing fan or interested much, but he just seemed to appear on radio and television, in newspapers. And apart from his obvious status as a boxer and a heavyweight champion and all of that, it was his rhetoric, his rhyming couplets, his poetry, and his great refrain about greatness. He said things like, "I float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. I am the greatest." And when he said it, it was with that steely determination and deep-seated belief. He believed in all his being that he was the greatest. Who is the greatest? What does it mean to be great? How do we determine greatness? That term G.O.A.T, greatest of all time, is applied in lots of different ways. How do we determine who the greatest of all time is? Is it possible? Is it possible to determine between, say, Novak Djokovic, Roger Federer, Rod Laver going, and everyone in between, or the Williams sisters, Martina Navratilova, Margaret Court, Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley, and others? Or the various sports or musicians or musical groups or songs. Every year there's the top 100, and how do we assess the greatest song of all time? Greatness perhaps is in the eye of the beholder. But all of this talk of greatness is usually about excellence or achievement or acquisition or becoming someone. And as people seek to be great and rise to the top, there's this great competitiveness, and to get to the top, you've almost got to tread on the heads of those below you and push them aside, beat them. And as this pyramid of greatness unfolds, there's a great mass of people pushed out down the bottom. As our society adores and adulates people who are great and achieved and accomplished and acquired much, there are many, many more who are left along the roadside, who are marginalised and lost. What does it mean to be great? This week marks the story of Jesus as we continue reading through. The journey from up north in Caesarea Philippi down to the holy city of Jerusalem continues. This week they're around Galilee. And Jesus, on the way, reminds them that when they get to Jerusalem, he will be arrested and tried, killed on a cross, but will rise again. Whatever all this means, this dying, rising kind of rhetoric that Jesus uses. And the disciples don't get it. And on the way, they're arguing about who is the greatest among them. When he gets to Capernaum, which has been the centre of the story in the first half of Mark's story, they go to a house, and Jesus asks them what they've been talking about, and there's deathly silence. And then he sits down and gathers the disciples, a posture in Mark that says, "This is important teaching, listen up." And he says to them, "Whoever of you wants to be first, the greatest, whoever wants to be first must become last, the least, the lowest, and serve everyone else. The greatest of you will be the servant, the one who engages with the poor and the outcast and the marginalised, the lowest and the least, who picks them up and dignifies them, gives them respect." And then he takes a child and he welcomes the child and says, "Anyone who welcomes this child welcomes me. Anyone who takes this child, this least, welcomes me, but not only me, the one who sent me." Children in Jesus' time were of no consequence. They had no status, nothing. No rights, nothing. They were non-people. They were worthless. Until they became adults or turned of age where they could be taught and trained and find their way. Men into the places of power in the household, and women having their own place. in a very patriarchal, dominating society. Children had no place. They didn't exist. They should not only be not heard, but should not be seen, heard, anything. They were pushed to the sides. They represented the least. And in this story, Jesus is saying, if you welcome this, the least, the lowest, the most vulnerable, you welcome me. When you welcome the lowest and the least in this world, you welcome me, and not only me, but the one who sent me. When you reach out to the poor and the marginalised and the lowly and the outcast, and treat them with dignity and respect and lift them up, that's what greatness is. And greatness becomes shared power, shared inclusion, shared welcoming, shared life. And in this new way that Jesus speaks of, this radical new way, it's about life for all people, not just those at the top. It's about picking up the vulnerable and the lost and the lowly, lifting them up into the place of welcome and of life and of hope. This is what Jesus invites us into. This is the way. I remember the stories of Michael Connolly, his crime fiction. One of his key characters is Harry Bosch. And Harry Bosch, growing up with a single mum who cared for him deeply and loved him, but who didn't have the resources to look after them, so turned to prostitution in order to make enough money to keep them. And she cared for Harry and protected him. But one day she was murdered while he was still young. And he was put into homes and moved around. And he experienced the trauma and the violence of life. And when he grew up, he became a homicide detective, really wanting to solve the case of his mum's death. It was never solved, and the police didn't seem to give great significance to it. She was only a prostitute. And his byline became, everyone counts or no one counts. And he tried to live by lifting up and looking after the least, giving them dignity in death that the wealthy or powerful or famous would get. But the trauma of his childhood was also manifest in his own life. And it played out in ways that were not always good for him or for others. And I think underlying what Jesus is talking about is that when we do trauma, when we do violence to the least, to the vulnerable, particularly children, then that violence will be part of who they are and will transform them in bad ways. And I've worked enough with counsellors and psychologists and in schools to see the impact on children when there's violence in their lives, whether it's psychological and emotional or physical violence, when they're hurt and traumatised, and how it impacts them, their self-esteem, their self-worth, their ability to engage with others, to believe in themselves, and the self-destructive behaviour that often breaks into their lives. And Jesus is saying, if you want to be great in this world, lift up the lowest. Give them life and hope and dignity. Share what you have with everyone. And bring everyone into a place of equality. We won't be the same. We'll bring different things to the table. But it's a place of love, of acceptance, of hope, of peace, of God's love. And when we welcome the lowest, we welcome this one who created all things, who holds all things and loves all things. This God we follow.